Hi guys, it's Steffi from the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with the next installment in my Books Beside My Bed series. A few things to note first. In the next couple of weeks, particularly throughout the month of February, you guys might see that my uploading schedule changes slightly and that I might have 3 videos instead of 4 each week. I'm just trying out a few things because I'm not entirely sure how much time I'm going to have this year, because I have a sneaking suspicion work is going to be a little bit more hectic this year than it has been in the past, and I may not have as much time to edit and upload and film as I usually would. So I'm going to try some things out in February, see if it makes things a little bit easier because I go back to work this week. And then hopefully by the end of Feb I will have a more regular schedule sorted out. I may just go back to the way things are, or I might have something just slightly different. It won't be dramatically different, but there might be some changes. The other reason for this is that I'm also trying to film 1 video a week for my teaching channel. And to be honest, filming and editing 5 videos a week is a lot. So I'm trying to just consolidate things a little bit and make my life a little bit easier. If you're interested in my teaching channel, I will leave a link down below. It's very small. I've only just started it and I've been very haphazard with it, but I'm hoping to get better. And there are some vlogs of my classroom setup if you're interested in seeing what the space I work in looks like. I've got to film some stuff this week of how it actually finally looks, because I've managed to actually get in and set up my tables and everything, and I'm feeling much happier about it because I love having a new classroom to work in. I love setting up a new space. This week I've been participating in Tome Infinity and Beyond 2. It is the 4th week and it wraps up this coming week. I have technically completed all of the challenges and now have control of my own galactic empire, but that said, I still have 2 books on my TBR that I am going to read for the readathon. The first one being Altered Carbon and also Babylon's Ashes, which is book 6 in the Expanse series. So you will hear about them next week. Without further ado, let's get into the stats for this week and then my reviews of the books. So this is my reading week from the 20th to the 26th of January. I read 8 books this week. I read a total of 2,470 pages and my yearly reading total is up to 29 books. The first book that I read this week was Space Opera by Katherine and Valente. This was published in 2018 by Corsair and I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I read this for the Tome Infinity Challenge Music in Tier 4 and I really enjoyed it because I really have a strong appreciation for Katherine and Valente's style, which is not to say that everyone will, because this book is completely bonkers. The story is told in a very roundabout way from some very weird narration perspectives. It felt insane to read it, but I don't know, maybe it was the time of week. I just really appreciated it because there is a lot of nonsense and there is a lot of weird and wacky things going on in this book. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the premise of the story, it is a story that is basically Eurovision in space. Centuries ago, there was a massive space war and there was a whole lot of alien nations involved. And at the end of it, everyone was feeling a little bit depressed. So in order to cheer themselves up, they created the Metagalactic Grand Prix, which is a regularly hosted musical competition between the different alien races. And it's a competition where if you happen to come in last place, your planet will be destroyed. Earth has been nominated as this year's newest rookie entrant, and the unlikely performance candidate is Despot Jones and the Absolute Zeros, and they are in way over their head, and the entire thing is just completely fun. And I had such a blast reading this book. Yes, there are times when I did wish Valente had sort of reined it in just a fraction, but overall, this is what someone who really knows how to play with language can do with it, and it was just highly entertaining. Then I read Lock-In by John Scalzi. This was published in 2014 by Gallant, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I read this for the Tome Infinity Challenge Invention. In this world, which is about 15 years from the present day, a virus has swept the planet and it has killed a significant portion of the population, and it's also caused another significant number of the population to be locked into their own bodies. So they still have brain function, but they essentially can't access their bodies. This virus is called Hayden syndrome. The world has changed dramatically since this event, and as such, they've had to invent ways to help those who have been affected by Hayden's to ensure that they can still participate in the world. And that is through the invention of synthetic bodies that can transport consciousness, and that allows people who are locked into their bodies, they can still go to work and they can still participate in all sorts of different things. There was a whole lot of funding as a result of the virus, and at the start of this story, the government is thinking of cutting that funding, and it's really following some of the implications of what that means for people who need access to the funding to continue research to try and reverse Hayden syndrome, and also to compensate for the costs of medical bills and also having access to these synthetic bodies. The main character of this story, Chris, has Hayden syndrome, and he has just become a police officer, and so he uses one of the synthetic bodies to move around, and his father has quite a strong political influence because as a result of Chris having been affected by Hayden's from a very, very young age. Everything else that follows is sort of this politically driven plot to solve a murder and terrorist attack and a whole bunch of other things, and it was just delightful. I love John Scalzi's writing. This is the second John Scalzi book I read, and I read a third one this week as well, and I was just delighted reading it. I can't wait to pick up the follow-up book to this. I know there's another one, and I just loved being in this world. It was really, really fascinating. So straight after Lock-In, I also read Red Shirts by John Scalzi, which was published in 2012 by Tor, and I gave 4 out of 5 stars. I read this for the challenge acting. Red Shirts is essentially a play on the trope in Star Trek where the low-ranked red shirt member of the away team constantly dies on an away mission, and our main character, Andrew Dahl, has just been assigned to the UUC ship Intrepid, which is sort of a flagship in this world. And once he comes on board the ship, he starts to notice that the crew act really, really strangely. The majority of the lower ranked crew go into hiding anytime a senior officer comes around looking for people to go on away missions, and he rapidly learns that that's because anyone who goes on an away mission tends to end up dead in a very gruesome, graphic way. What he uncovers is a very, very strange, twisty sort of plot, which I didn't see coming the way that it was. I fully expected it to go in one direction, and it didn't. It did something completely different, which I really appreciated, but it does really poke fun at the Red Shirts idea and also the idea of science fiction TV shows and how completely insane they can be, which I really appreciated. So it was a lot of fun. It's technically called Red Shirts, a story with 3 coders, and the only reason I didn't give it 5 out of 5 stars is I really didn't appreciate the 3 coders at the end. It just felt like the story kept going, and I don't think they necessarily added anything to the story for me. But the main story I really, really enjoyed. Then I read The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. This was originally published in 1895. The edition that I have said that it was published by Atria Books. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, and honestly I'd probably give it less than that because I can sort of tell you the plot synopsis after I read it, but you guys know me in classics. I read them if I have to, and I read this because I needed to read a vintage sci-fi, and I wanted to read it. It's one of those things. I should read more classic books, but the problem I have is that I just don't get along with them very well. The world is going on, and all of a sudden there's this meteorite or rock that hits the ground from outer space, and the people who come to explore this crash landing realize that there is something alive because it's a metal shell, and they realize that there's something inside it. And very slowly these aliens come to life and then start wiping out all life, quite indiscriminately, really. The main character sort of stumbles his way through survival of this event and has to hide in a lot of places and has to escape and is trying to convince people that, you know, the aliens are here. I'm sure someone who really loves the story could give a more profound summary of it, but it honestly just happened. And I felt like the ending was rather convenient, how they resolved the problem of the aliens. Very, very convenient. But, you know, convenient but not necessarily incorrect either. So it was okay. Then to break up my sci-fi reading, I read The Boy in the Dress by David Walliams. This is a middle grade fiction book. It was published in 2008 by HarperCollins, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I read this because this is one of the books that's going into my classroom for my younger readers, and I wanted to read it beforehand, and I know that a lot of people had said that they'd read it to their class, so I thought I'd better read it first, just in case it becomes one of our class read alouds. For those who are interested, I am planning on doing weekly reviews of the children's books that I read with my class over on my teaching blog, littlebookishteacher.com. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, feel free to head over and check it out. That is something that's going to be regularly happening, so I did put up a little mini review of this on Friday. This is the story of Dennis, who is a thoroughly ordinary boy living in a thoroughly ordinary house and town with his brother and his father. His mother has left them, and as such things have never quite been the same in their household. However, one day something happens and Dennis crosses paths with Lisa, who is one of the most beautiful girls in the school, and they strike up a friendship over fashion. What follows is a whole lot of fun, really, as Lisa and Dennis dress Dennis up in girls' clothing and pretend that he is an exchange student from France and fool everyone until something happens and the ruse is revealed, and it has very big consequences for Dennis. It was funny and heartwarming and charming, and it has great friendship. It deals with the complicated nature of dealing with family and accepting people for who they are and not what you think they should be. So it was a really lovely book. Then I read Soulless by Gail, Carriger, which is book 1 in the Parasol Protectorate series. This was published in 2009 by Hachette, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I read this for the Steampunk Challenge in Tier 5 for Tome Infinity and beyond, and I adored it. Soulless follows Alexia Terabody, who is soulless, and she lives in a world where there are werewolves and there are vampires, and there are a very small number of people like herself who are soulless. And they basically have the ability to negate the effects of werewolves and vampires. So if they touch a werewolf or a vampire, those creatures begin to lose the traits that make them what they are and revert back to being human. As such, this puts her in a very interesting position because these races don't really want to have too much to do with her. Meanwhile, I think it's set in Victorian England, maybe. It's definitely that historical time period, and she is 25, unmarried, and is thus deemed a spinster. She's sort of come to terms to deal with that, and now has decided just to use her position to do what she needs to do. And she is very determined to be involved in helping to solve crimes that involve vampires and werewolves. And one evening she is attacked by a vampire. She finds herself pulled into an investigation that really has larger implications for the entire community. And being involved in this also puts her in the sights of Lord Macon, who is the head of the area and the head of the sort of supernatural police force as well. And the two have the most delightfully antagonistic relationship for the first half, and then it becomes this wonderful, it's not quite enemies to lovers, it's sort of the not quite enemies to lovers sort of trope, and it's a whole lot of fun. So I really enjoyed this, and I'm planning on continuing the rest of the series. Next, I read Terra Nullius by Clergy, Cogman. This was published in 2017 by Hachette, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. This is an Australian Indigenous dystopian story, and I read it for the Tome Infinity Challenge Dystopian. I also happened to be reading this on Australia Day, which was entirely coincidental. I did not plan that out on my part, but you know, maybe it was just meant to be. For those of you who aren't familiar with the story, it is a story about the colonization of the traditional people of Australia. And you start off the story and it really reads like the colonization of Australia, the actual colonization of Australia, and the colonizing group of people are very overbearing. They have taken children away from their families. They are keeping the natives as servants. But as the story goes on, you begin to realize nothing is quite what it seems, and there's a twist. And I actually can't tell you the twist because if you don't know it, you don't want to go into it knowing what the twist is and what makes it fit into sort of this dystopian science fiction category. So it's not what it seems, but it's really, really fantastically written. We follow a whole lot of characters, some of the settlers as well as some of the native population. And mostly we're tracking the progress of a young teen boy called Jackie who has escaped from the homestead where he is a servant, and a whole lot of opposing forces are trying to track him down because his escape is seen to possibly incite rebellion in the natives. So it's a really, really powerful book, and I'm so glad that I read it. It was really fascinating to read. The first part of it is a little bit slow as you're trying to wrap your head around exactly what's going on, because the whole time you're reading it, because I knew that it was a dystopian, I was trying to wrap my head around how it was a dystopian because you don't get that feel. It almost feels like historical fiction to begin with. So I sort of had that strange disconnect. But once I really got into the meat of the story and really got going. It was a really, really fascinating read. Finally, I read The Mortal Word by Genevieve Cogman. This is book 5 in the Invisible Library series, and I read this for the Tome Infinity Challenge Science Fantasy. This was published in 2018 by Pan Macmillan, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I love this series to bits. If you are unfamiliar with the series, the first book is The Invisible Library, and it is a world where the universe has 2 opposing forces, the dragons and the fae, and the dragons represent order and the fae represent chaos, and all the different worlds, different versions of Earth that exist between these 2 opposing forces can be chaos ruled or order ruled, and there's sort of this organization in the middle called the library that is a neutral party and consists of humans who steal books from different alternate Earths to stabilize the connections between these different worlds. So the librarians can travel between any of these worlds. In book 5, Irene, the librarian who is the main character in the series, has been summoned to 1890s Paris, and she's there to help solve a murder that has occurred during peace talks between the dragons and the fae, who are natural enemies. And then she finds herself pulled into something even bigger than she first imagined, and it becomes very political, and it's a murder mystery. It's just a whole lot of fun. I really love this series. I always enjoy diving back into the world. The only reason I didn't give it 5 out of 5 stars this time is that this book is just a little bit longer than some of the others, and it felt like it took a little bit longer to get started, but it was still very fascinating and very interesting. It was just a little bit slower than I was expecting. So those are the books that I read this week. In the comments, let me know if you have read any of these books or if you're planning to read them in the future. And also let me know, what are you currently reading and enjoying? I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're having a wonderful day, and I'll catch you guys in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye guys.